Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on Swish City. I'm your host, Bruce Veliz, and in today's episode, we're doing another one of our NBA offseason breakdowns and season previews, diving into each NBA team before the start of the 2025-2026 NBA season. In today's episode, as you guys can see from the title and the thumbnail, we're going to be discussing the Indiana Pacers, a team that is fresh off of a Eastern Conference Finals win and making the NBA Finals. Unfortunately, losing it in 7 games with its star player Tyrese Halliburton getting a series and year-ending injury that is going to hinder their development this season. But with their young core and depth that is very, very deep, this team could still be a very valuable one in Eastern Conference that is a little bit weakened. So let's dive in and let's talk about Indiana Pacers. So like I alluded to in the introduction, obviously Tyrese Halliburton, their number one player and the one that led them to the NBA Finals, is out this season as he obviously tore his ACL when he was playing in the NBA Finals against the Oklahoma City Thunder. And with tearing his ACL and Achilles, he is going to be out for the entire season. But with the Pacers having that depth, like I mentioned, they're hopefully still going to be a team that is still going to be at the top front of the Eastern Conference. So let's dive in and let's explore the Indiana Pacers, going over their additions, who they brought in, who they ultimately lost this offseason, and how their depth is really going to keep them afloat in this East and to place them where I think they are respective of. So diving into the additions, we can see that the Pacers made one signing, and technically they made two, but I didn't include the first one because that player ended up getting waived because this player just got signed. So Cameron Payne was recently brought in to the Indiana Pacers on an Exhibit 9 deal, competing for a training camp spot to make that last roster spot for this Pacers team to fill out and be another guard within this rotation. As like we've mentioned, Halliburton is going to be out for the year, and T.J. McConnell just recently suffered an injury that's going to keep him for at least out a couple of weeks. So with that being said, the depth at the point guard position is very low for the Pacers here, and they need some veteran leadership. They went and got DeLon Wright, had him for a little bit, waived him, now bring in Cameron Payne, who was on the New York Knicks last year as a shot creator and scorer for their depth, and someone that could still be a vital part within an organization, and I think a creative bench scorer for this Pacers team, specifically with those 2 point guards out. They also made one trade this offseason where they traded for Jay Huff. They traded cash considerations and that stuff for Huff, who comes from the Grizzlies, a team that once again was trying to shed salary, but also had an abundance of bigs. Huff was a two-way standout that grew similar like Vince Williams and G.G. Jackson for the team, and is going in to replace a guy in Miles Turner, who was the centerpiece, the number one option before Tyrese Halliburton had been there and had been kind of the franchise player for the Pacers for these last couple of years. He obviously left in free agency, so Huff has some big shoes to fill, but with him playing in some limited roles for the Memphis Grizzlies, has excelled and I think could maybe develop into a better big for the Pacers, with obviously Turner being gone. They also made 2 selections here in the draft, taking 2 guards in Cam Jones and Talon Peter, who both have had some great flashes from them in their college and playing for the Summer League for this Pacers team and preseason. And on 2 ways, they have 3 guards, which are Talon Peter, Quentin Jackson, and Ray J. Dennis, 3 offensive scorers that have been seemingly impressive throughout the preseason so far, and could be candidates even if they don't get the last guaranteed spot. Maybe it does go to campaign or they leave it open. Could be valuable assets for this team on 2-way contracts that could still play up for this Indiana Pacers team, and specifically in the start of the season when they need that depth of the guard, can have that valuable pieces to maybe even convert into standard deals down the line. With that being said, with the Pacers, those are their additions and 2-way players. So let's dive into who they lost. They traded Mojave King, and they traded his draft rights over to the Pelicans, involved in the deal which they made with the Pelicans to get their first round pick back for next season. They ultimately made that deal before Tyrese Halliburton got hurt, but it is a deal that is going to be beneficiary for them. Obviously now this year without Tyrese, they can still have their first round pick. So if they don't pan out to be a top tier team and the injuries do succumb to them, they could still get a good valuable piece to either trade or draft for this future or core. But 3 players they did lose in free agency this offseason were Miles Turner, Enrique Freeman, and Thomas Bryant. Miles Turner goes and leaves, obviously, like I mentioned, one of the franchise players alongside Tyrese Halliburton for this team, someone that had been on this team for a long time and had been a center of trade talks with the Pacers for a very long time, with him being a name mentioned as a possible trade unit, as a possible trade asset, never ended up happening. But weirdly, in the most successful year for the Pacers, where they make the finals and you would expect him to get a contract to retain their center, he ends up leaving. Now, ultimately, the Pacers did not give him the full money that he thought he deserved or expected for this Pacers team after bringing them, obviously, to an NBA Finals. But there were some clear discrepancies with him in the finals, having some struggles there that definitely maybe lured the Pacers a little bit off. But ultimately, I do still think Turner is a top 10 center in the NBA when he is playing at his best ability, and I think can be a quality offensive piece that the Pacers are definitely going to lose. It also doesn't help that Tyrese Haliburton obviously got hurt this offseason, and for the Pacers, maybe they see this as we can lose out on Miles Turner because we don't think he's going to bring that much to us, and we think we can invest our money into other pieces or better depth to really fill out this roster to be more competitive. They also lost Freeman, who was a wing. He goes to the Timberwolves on a two-way, and they also lost Thomas Bryant, who was obviously someone had some big-time moments throughout the playoffs, hitting some big-time threes, and was used as a depth piece for the Pacers this playoffs. He goes and signs as a veteran for the Cavs to go and back up their center group, but ultimately, the Pacers, I just realized, lose two centers, and both of them to Central Division opponents. Kind of funny when you think about it. Lastly, they're unsigned free agents, as no one went overseas for this team. Their only player that has remained unsigned is James Johnson. James Johnson's obviously just kind of a veteran vocal leader on the bench, doesn't really get much playing time, but just is used as a mentor and stuff like that. Maybe this season they do bring him back as a bench piece to kind of help out, or he could just be not brought back because the Pacers want to be bad, want to keep an open roster spot, and could be utilized being brought back in a future season, but at the moment remains unsigned. So that being said, this is the Pacers depth chart when looking at it. Andrew Nembhard, Benedict Mathurin, Andrew Nesmith, Pascal Siakam, and Jay Huff. This is the expected starting five that I think they will go with. Obviously, with Tyrese Haliburton being out, if he was starting, it would look a little bit different. But with him being out, this is the case. Nembhard is going to have a lot to prove this season, obviously, as he is going to be the lead guard for a majority of the season and for sure the start of the year, with TJ McConnell also being out. His playmaking ability has been solid, and his two-way game as a defender, as an on-ball defender, is very solid with his aggressiveness and tenaciousness on the ball, but also his ability to be a catch-and-shoot scorer and creating his own shot has been pretty effective as well. He once again kind of has to take this little bit of a leap, though, and prove to the Indiana Pacers that he is better than what he can be as just a complementary guard and someone that can step up in places to being that kind of lead guard for this team. Benedict Mathurin, though, I think has the biggest rise and the biggest weight of shoulders on impact for the Pacers team this season, as he was recently drafted, obviously just a couple years ago, with a very high pick from out of the University of Arizona, and for this Pacers team has had bright flashes where he's looked very dominant, specifically even last night where he went basically perfect from the field and did go perfect from the field in the first half. And his ability to drive to the rack and be that kind of slasher and attack at the mid-range is just what makes him so lethal. His also three-point shot has been developing and getting better, and if he can stay consistent on that, I think that's going to just even really rise his game even more because of his inconsistencies with his shooting numbers in the past. But Mathurin just has that energy, that motor, that hustle that you want to see in a young wing. And unfortunately with the Pacers, because of Tyrese Haliburton, this is no slack on Tyrese Haliburton, but him and Benedict Mathurin don't really work together because Benedict Mathurin needs the ball in his hands to control his own game, and Tyrese, obviously, as the playmaker and the initiator and as the setter-upper, also needs the ball in his hands to set up the game. So there's a lot of conflict with Mathurin and Tyrese Haliburton on the court, hence why Mathurin has relegated to being that kind of ultra six-man for this Pacers team and really better factoring in that, controlling the second unit. But this season with Tyrese Haliburton out, I think it's truly the year for Benedict Mathurin to put his name on the map. This is the year where, unfortunately, because of his injuries, he is going to thrive as that the ball dominant wing for this Pacers team and being that number one option, and I think is really going to put himself out there as a trade candidate for the future. He hasn't gotten his long-term extension with this Pacers team from his rookie scale deal, and I think that is because the Pacers haven't really known what they have in Benedict Mathurin yet and don't really know if he can complement Tyrese, and I think it's clear that he can't. So I think moving off of Mathurin and trying to get a complementary piece that can work with Tyrese Haliburton in this Pacers team after seeing such a booming year this year is not only going to help out the Pacers this season by giving them the best outlook possible by investing in him, but also giving Mathurin the best chance to be his best player, going to another team and having the possibility of being that number 1 or number 2 option in which he can actually coexist and mesh with the other superstar player that is there. And I think that's going to be the best of both worlds for those teams. Next, we have Aaron Nesmith. Sorry for the rant on Mathurin. I just really, he's one of my favorite players in the NBA. So I want to see the best for him. But Aaron Nesmith, another player I really like on this Pacers team, catch and shoot scorer, 3-and-D wing. We saw him hit those big shots in the playoffs multiple times and really rise for the Pacers here. And we all know he's had that, chip on his shoulder ever getting traded from the Celtics, and I ultimately, as a Celtics fan, got to watch him play with the team, and I knew that this rise was going to happen. Maybe not to this degree of greatness for Aaron Nesmith, I won't lie, but I do say that he just didn't mesh with the Celtics because there was no room in that wing rotation with Gordon Hayward there, with Jason Tatum there, with Jaylen Brown there, and them having so many dominant wings and having to play through the Jays. There wasn't just any growth for Nesmith to get minutes, and once he was able to get those minutes, his defensive impact was already there. But if he could grow as an offensive player and be that dominant shooter like he was in college, where he was the best, he had the best 3-point shooting in that class, he would be effective, and he has clearly found that on the Pacers. I think he complements Tyrese Haliburton to the perfect ability, and that's why he gets the starting nod over Benedict Mathurin. I think that he is really going to rise, specifically working with Benedict, because it's kind of the same thing ultimately. Obviously, just a ISO-dominated player who's going to control most of the offense, and Nesmith just works perfectly complementing playing off of those players. We also have Pascal Siakam, who is another key piece for this Indiana Pacers team and has kind of gone under the radar for seemingly a lot of his career. Obviously, with the Raptors, was a late first-round pick. Not really many people noticed him, and then they won the championship. And after they won the championship, he had one rough year, and then everyone ever since that has really written Pascal Siakam off kind of as a number 2/number 3 option, someone that's not really going to be a top tier player in his position. And I would argue he is the best power forward we might have here in the NBA, if you want to say true power forward. But if not, he's definitely one of the top tier bigs in the association, with his ability to be a Swiss Army knife, being able to play the small ball 5, being able to play that power forward position, but also being able to basically do everything that both those positions require, both on the offensive and defensive end. You want him to hit a 3, he can do it. You want him to guard the perimeter, he can do it. You want him to guard the paint, he can do it. You need him to grab a rebound offensively or defensively, he can be effective doing so. Pascal Siakam is one of those players, when you hear the name, it's not one of those flashy names, but if you know basketball, you recognize how effective he is on the court for these teams with his plus minuses, and he is very well deserving of that Eastern Conference Finals MVP, similar to how a player in Jaylen Brown, who was the best player in those Eastern Conference Finals, was very deserving of his. I feel like those two players are very similar in their regard and how they're respected across the NBA, because they're very good second options, could be potentially even number 1 options, but work better, personally in my opinion, as second options, complementing a dominating superstar and being able to play off of that and using the hindrances of the defense or offense that they're playing against to benefactor them and their strengths, and I think that they're very, very underrated. And then lastly, Jay Huff coming in and finishing out this starting room, like I mentioned, I think is going to be an under-the-radar piece and kind of filling in for Miles Turner. Maybe not as effective day one, maybe as a key impact player, but ultimately for this Pacers room, they do have a lot of bigs and a lot of players that they can run at this 5, so I think having different types of big men to really run within this center rotation to complement what team you're playing is going to be best for the Pacers in dealing with this injury. So next, let's stay in this center room, because I feel like the forward and center room here for the power forwards is very, very talked about with the Pacers, because it's very, very deep, and why I think losing Turner isn't really as effective or as detrimentary is because Isaiah Stewart is also here. He's been a solid shot blocker, rim protector, and rebounder for this Pacers team as a backup big man. Unfortunately, has dealt with injuries for his career, and most notably last season was out for the entire season very early to the start due to an injury. But I do think if he can retain to stay healthy, and specifically if they do get James Wiseman going, do get Jarris Walker some small ball 5 minutes, which we'll get into a little bit as well, and maybe even Tony Bradley sprinkled in here and there with Jay Huff, Pascal Siakam playing some small ball 5, Isaiah Stewart can actually thrive in the minutes that he's ultimately utilized in, and I think can be a little bit more dominating if he's on a minute restraint. And as sad as that sounds, I do think for some of these players, if they are given the leash of playing 30 minutes, it ultimately, if they are injury prone, it increases their chance of getting injured, and I think Isaiah Stewart needs to be a key depth piece as a shot blocker and protector for this Pacers team to replace that for Miles Turner. And then you got James Wiseman, similar to Stewart, had some bright spots with the Pacers last year, but got injured once again. If he can thrive, and him as Isaiah Stewart can kind of share this backup big shot blocker and rim protector, I would love that for the Pacers. They both get 10 to 15 minutes. They both share those minutes, right? Both maybe get 10 minutes a night, 8 minutes a night, but it keeps them both on the court and healthy and ready to go, but also doesn't tire one of them out to where one of them is completely injured. And depending on the matchup or foul trouble, you can, give one more a little bit a better time if they are dominating compared to the other one in those games, sharing those backup minutes. But I do think kind of splitting them up, because they both have been injury prone throughout their career, to limit that possibility is going to be key. And then Tony Bradley kind of filling out that rotation as that veteran big. We could see him getting some playing time. And then lastly, Jarace Walker, he's in that power forward position because I do think we're going to see him play some more power forward this year for the Indiana Pacers, but he can even play some small ball five for this team, as he obviously played some power forward and center over at Houston when he was in college. And for the Pacers, similar to Bennedict Mathurin, they took him with a high overall pick, but with having such a deep room and now acquiring Pascal Siakam, having Miles Turner, having Obi Toppin, there was never really this option to play Jarace Walker all these minutes, right? Because you had those veterans ahead of him. And now, with it kind of dwindling down, with them dealing with some injuries, I think this is the year we get to see the Jarace Walker experience. We've already kind of gotten some of it in the summer league and preseason, and it's looked very, very solid of his defensive ability, his switchability, his rebounding. And I think he's one of those players, once again, on the Pacers that I feel like is kind of hindered behind all this great depth because they are so deep already, and they don't want to trade a piece that could seemingly just bloom somewhere else just for nothing. So I completely understand why the Pacers have been reluctant to trade him, but ultimately, as a fan of Jarace Walker and wanting to see the best out of Walker in his career, I would love for him either to get that kind of juice start with the Pacers, maybe even jumping up and being that backup big man for them in this rotation at the starting five, or getting some minutes in the power forward room. If not, please, Indiana Pacers, just trade him so he can get some burn somewhere else. And then looking throughout this rotation, Obi Toppin, one of my favorite power forwards across the league. Ultimately, within this Pacers rotation, I think one of him or Walker should be traded just because I think they have a little too much depth there. Could utilize some more on that wing room here, getting in another 3-and-D type of guy. And I think they both could have very good trade value, as Toppin last year just proved he was a solid role player, and then continuously in the playoffs proved that he could step up in big moments. And Jarace Walker has that unproven ability where he has some untapped potential where teams would be very invested. But Obi Toppin, once again, like I mentioned, one of the top tier role players across the league, can rebound, can shot block, high flying athlete, can get some crazy cool dunks, very effective on the defensive end. Someone that I think a lot of teams, if he is potentially out there on the trade block, if Jarace Walker does rise, should definitely pounce on, especially if the Pacers are a little bit weaker. Ben Shepherd, Johnny Furphy, two wings. You could put Shepherd at the 2, Furphy at the 3. Spot Track had them, and I'm going off of Spot Track because shout out to Keith Smith for working over there, but they have the best rosters in my opinion. Says Shepherd plays the 3, Furphy's going to play the 2. You could argue 2-3. I don't really care. Shepherd, obviously, shot maker and shot creator, going to be a catch and shoot scorer for this Pacers team on the wing. And then Furphy, we have seen, man, oh man, the crazy athleticism out of him with his being ability to leap high and dunk all over the summer league and preseason. I think he is going to be one of those names on the Pacers that is going to turn some heads if he gets the ability to burn within this ring rotation. I think he is, as you can see, as they are very weak there. And then lastly, looking at the guard room here, we got TJ McConnell, who I mentioned is going to be out for the start of the season. Just recently got injured, but I do think when he comes back will once again be another key piece for this Pacers team, being that secondary critter. Man, oh man. It's just like when Tyrese Halliburton comes out, the Pacers just don't lose any playmaking ability at all, with his creativeness of being an effective ball distributor, holding out and just running these rotations with the Pacers. He's just so effective with the ball in his hands, and even without the ball as a catch and shoot scorer, very, very valuable for this Pacers team. And then lastly, Cam Jones coming out of Marquette here. He is one of the 2 picks here for the Pacers. He's obviously a little bit better as an off-ball scorer, catch-and-shoot scorer. You could argue that he could be playing that shooting guard position. With his height, he might be a little bit smaller, might need to transition to the 1. That's why I'm having him playing the point guard. But Cam Jones, 2 years ago at Marquette, with a stacked roster, was very, very dominant as kind of that secondary third option for that team. Then obviously last year with those players kind of going to the NBA, stuck around in college, kind of boosting up his stock a bit. Unfortunately, didn't really do that much as Marquette wasn't as valuable, and it looked a little bit worse with him as that number 1 option. But I do think can be a valuable catch and shoot scorer, very, very creative on the offensive end, and has that green light to get effective from 3-point range. And specifically with the Pacers team needing some guard play, right? At any point with McConnell now down, Tyrese Haliburton out for the year, they're going to need some help with Andrew Nembhard, right? Cam Jones is going to be playing for this Pacers team at some point to start in the early parts of the year. You need to hit on this pick, and I think he has the possibility out of a lot of second-round picks to rise with that great offensive ability and to fill in for a guy in Haliburton, maybe even be a key rotational player down the line for this squad. So where do I put the Indiana Pacers across the other teams in this Eastern Conference? Well, they did make the NBA Finals last season, and I will say that if Tyrese Haliburton was healthy, this team would be completely different on this list. I do think they mesh well. I do think they have a lot of great pieces. Their depth is really going to show and come together, and I don't think they have a lot of holes within this rotation, but unfortunately, they are at 7th in the Eastern Conference here, right ahead of the Bucks, Hornets, Sixers, Heat, Raptors, Wizards, Bulls, and Nets. With those lower teams, I think it's pretty self-explanatory why I think the Pacers are going to be ahead of them. When going and looking at the teams in the team they are ahead of in the Milwaukee Bucks, I was tossy-turvy with this. I did have the Bucks higher than them at first, but I did put the Pacers end up over them just due to the fact that I feel, even though the Bucks have Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? And they have this dominant force in the front court. And the Pacers seemingly look a little bit weaker there with obviously losing Miles Turner with him going to the Bucks. I do think that this Pacers team just depth-wise looks a little bit better. Their guard room in Milwaukee just is a little bit unproven, has a little bit of younger guys that need to make a standout to not only stay in the league, but to get a long-term contract. And for the Pacers, they do have some that with some of these younger guys like a Johnny Furphy or a Ben Shepherd, a Cam Jones, Jarris Walker, etc. But they also have guys that have been in these situations and have been on this team for multiple years and understand that role, right? Obviously, they have to rise in their role. Maybe it's a little bit difficult for Andrew Nembhard. Maybe it's a little bit harder for Benedict Mathurin to stay consistent, a little bit tougher in this front court room with Jay Huff and Isaiah Stewart compared to Miles Turner. But I do think, right, when it comes down to it, this Pacers team understands the way that they play basketball, and they play ideally to what their name stays, right? A fast-paced team. And obviously with Tyrese Haliburton, they're not going to be able to play to that fast pace that they would like to, but they're still going to be a top-tier team because Andrew Nembhard, even though he's not the playmaker that Tyrese Haliburton is, Nembhard is still a dominant playmaker and can set up offenses and run those units. So I do think that this Pacers team is going to be a little bit ahead of the Milwaukee Bucks. They do come short comparative to some other teams, one that maybe I do have ahead of them just because they are a homer pick. I do think that they could realistically go either way. Ultimately, the Pacers, the Bucks, and this next team that I'm going to be talking about most likely tomorrow or the next day here in the Eastern Conference are all kind of close here for me, but I do think that the Pacers just sneak it out, but not by too much, falling in 7th, and still 7th is fine. That's still a play-in team and a team that if you win one game is into the playoffs. Obviously a tough opponent going against the number 2 seed, but we've seen crazier things happen in the NBA. They could easily sneak a surprise win, and the Pacers have been underdogs these last 2 years and have proved to be good as an underdog, right? They made the Eastern Conference Finals as an underdog 2 seasons ago versus the Celtics, and they made the NBA Finals and were one game away. And you could argue if they had Tyrese Haliburton and were healthy, they would have won that Game 7. So a lot of things could be said about this Pacers team. They could once again shock us with this depth and be even better than I think at the 7th position. But ultimately, I have them falling 7th, and I am not scared to say that they could be better, but they ultimately could be worse, or they could be right here. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, what you guys think about the Indiana Pacers. Once again, I really do appreciate all the love and support that you guys do show here on the channel. So let me know by leaving your thoughts down below in the comment section, hitting that like button, and making sure to stay tuned by hitting that subscribe so you can make sure you're up to date when your team does release if they have not already. With the NBA season coming, we'll have more videos here on the channel, so make sure to stay tuned with everything NBA over here on Swish City. But I'll catch you guys in the next one. Have a great rest of your day, and peace out.